This conference will now be recorded.
So class, we spoke about sickle cell anemia in the previous class. This is the case we discussed. A 3-year-old child presenting with pallor, jaundice, severe pain of long bones, fever. The CBC shows anemia, reticulocytosis, increased WBC count. The lab values show an LDH of 600, which is abnormal, raised. Serum bilirubin of 5 milligrams, which is also raised. So this indicates some sort of hemolytic anemia. There's obviously hemolysis because the LDH is raised. Serum bilirubin is 5 milligrams. Ideally, you need to know the values of indirect and direct bilirubin. Indirect is more, that means there is more unconjugated bilirubin, so there's evidence of hemolysis. If direct is more, that means there is evidence of conjugated hyperbilirubinemia, which is seen in case of obstructive jaundice or biliary tract disease. So now considering this as a hemolytic anemia, you get a peripheral smear done, and the peripheral smear shows this particular picture. Here you see the peripheral smear showing that it has sickle shaped RBC. So you make a diagnosis of sickle cell anemia as a differential diagnosis. And then you go for further investigations. And based upon the clinical manifestations of pain of long bones, you suspect a vaso-occlusive crisis. Right. Moving forward, the diagnosis is using hemoglobin electrophoresis, where the HbS or sickle cell is greater than 80%. The hemoglobin F or fetal hemoglobin is 1 to 20%. And HbA2 should be 2 to 4.5%. This will be less than that. And the sickling test can be positive in these cases. So that is how you establish a diagnosis of sickle cell anemia. We've discussed about pathophysiology and how the hemoglobin looks, types of sickle cell anemia, pathophysiology of sickle cell crisis, the symptoms, clinical manifestations of sickle cell anemia, chronic hemolytic anemia, sickle cell crisis like vaso-occlusive crisis, clinic sequestration crisis, aplastic crisis, and hemolytic crisis. Vaso-occlusive crisis consisting of stroke, acute chest syndrome, acute abdominal pain, priapism, and dactylitis. We discussed about all these complications of sickle cell anemia and different organ involvements. And skeletal manifestations also like bone marrow hyperplasia, bone infection, and growth disturbances. So, in brief, this is the clinical and laboratory features of sickle cell anemia. There are ocular manifestations, CNS manifestations, cardiac manifestations, pulmonary manifestations, hepatic and gallbladder manifestations, renal manifestations, dactylitis, arthropathies, priapism, leg ulcerations, and splenic infection. Also, skeletal manifestations. So you get a peripheral smear done, you get sickling test done. If sickling test is positive, you go for hemoglobin electrophoresis. Hemoglobin electrophoresis, this is the picture you see. Right. So investigations are complete blood count, hemoglobin PCV and RBC count are low. MCV, MCH, and MCHC will be normal. The reticulocyte count will be increased because this is hemolytic anemia. It's a hyperproliferative bone marrow picture. And the total WBC count is increased and neutrophilia is common. The platelet count will also be increased. In peripheral blood smear, you can see sickle cells, target cells, polychromatic cells, and nucleated RBCs. Inclusions like basophilic stippling, Howell-Jolly bodies, and Pappenheimer bodies. If infection is present, a left shift may be present. So you have to understand that because of the involvement of spleen and the early destruction of RBCs, there'll be a lot of inclusions and also probably a left shift if this infection is present. The sickling test is a qualitative test is used to identify HbS erythrocytes. The method is using 2 drops of 2% sodium metabisulfite plus 1 drop of blood. Observed at 15 and 30 minutes, the presence of sickling makes the test positive. In sickle solubility test, the presence of HbS can be demonstrated by exposing red cells to a reducing agent such as sodium diethionite. HbA gives us clear solution, whereas HbS polymerizes to produce a turbid solution. And the confirmatory test, the definitive diagnosis requires hemoglobin electrophoresis to demonstrate the absence of HbA, 2 to 20% HbF, and the predominance of HbS. Other investigations are LFT, which may show raised bilirubin, serum LDH, which is raised, and ultrasound abdomen, which might show either increased size of spleen in the beginning of sickle cell anemia, eventually leading to shrunken spleen, and probably in the end stages or in the early ages of adolescence, you can see a complete auto splenectomy done. Auto splenectomy in ultrasound abdomen. There can be mild hepatomegaly also. So that's what we discussed in the last class. And this class, we're going to discuss about the treatment of sickle cell anemia, the treatment of sickle cell crisis, and the treatment of sickle cell disease and sickle cell traits too. So there are like every class where I subdivide the entire slides into few sub parts. Here I've divided the treatment into seven particular slides. Sorry, seven particular subtypes. The first one is preventive and supportive care. So the when parents are going to have children, there are patients who have symptoms of sickle cell anemia if they are heterozygous, and in those patients you can have genetic prenatal counseling done to look for sickle cell trait in the other parent. So you can tell them there's a 25% chance that their kid will have sickle cell disease, not sickle cell trait. Sickle cell trait of one parent, sickle cell trait of the other parent together can produce a 25% chance of sickle cell disease and a 50% chance of sickle cell trait and a 25% chance of normal progeny. So because there's a 25% chance, you have to prenatally counsel the parents that this is what is going to happen if they are going to have a conception. So that comes under the preventive aspect of sickle cell anemia. This is the prenatal counseling. Also, if the parents are not aware of the particular disease they have, but they may have symptoms of sickle cell trait, and the parent has already undergone pregnancy and conception has already started, then you can go for chronic villus sampling or fetal blood sampling to look for sickle cell traits again. And there is no definitive treatment for sickle cell disease. So all the treatment that you give is supportive. So that's why the first one is called preventive and supportive care. The second one is a vaso-occlusive crisis management. Vaso-occlusive crisis is a life-threatening condition, so you have to manage it immediately. So hospitalization is required in case of vaso-occlusive crisis. So the more number of hospitalizations, the bad the prognosis, the worse the prognosis. So that is important. The next one is selective RBC transfusion. Now we spoke about iron deficiency anemia before. We spoke about megaloblastic anemia before. Parts of the treatment of these diseases are blood transfusions. But obviously the indications of blood transfusion in those cases are if there is a concurrent heart failure or severe anemia that can cause hypotension or other conditions where you might require blood transfusion or something like a perioperative surgery evaluation, something like that. So even in sickle cell anemia, there are certain indications for RBC transfusion. Not every single patient requires RBC transfusion. So that is important. The fourth one is the treatment of complications. So what are the complications that can occur in sickle cell anemia? All that can be treated separately. So we give under every subheading the treatment of complications will be discussed. The fifth one is the use of a pentavalent or hepatitis vaccine and penicillin prophylaxis, especially in children, to prevent the infections in sickle cell anemia. The sixth one is a disease modifying therapy. There are some drugs that are useful for modifying the disease up to some extent in sickle cell anemia. The seventh one is gene therapy, where gene therapy has proven to be of some use in sickle cell anemia. So all these seven things will be discussed in the next few slides. So first one is preventive and supportive care. So first one is genetic screening of the parents. This is prenatally done. Once the genetic screening is done, a decision is given to the patients if they want to continue with the pregnancy or not, or if they want to go for the pregnancy or not. The second one is testing for sickle cells in babies. So fetal sampling and chorionic villus sampling can be done. Amniotic fluid sampling can be done, and fetal blood sampling also can be done to look for sickle cells. So here you go for this sampling, find out if the baby or the fetus has sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait. Heterozygous sickle cell trait, there's no problem usually. They have a very good prognosis. There are only mild anemia. Sometimes raised LFT can be seen, but usually asymptomatic. Uh, you can also look for if there's a sickle cell thalassemia trait, if there's a sickle cell hemoglobin C trait also, because those are also conditions where the patient or the born baby will have symptoms. So third one is daily penicillin for newborn babies with the disease to prevent further infections or complications. This is a very useful prophylaxis for newborn babies. The first one is that prevention, and the second one is management of vaso-occlusive crisis or pain. Now, sickle cell anemia presents with anemia and mild jaundice, but the major presentation of sickle cell anemia is pain. So, pain over long bones is a very severe pain. It's almost a 7 to 8 out of 10 on the pain scale. So, immediate treatment and relief of pain is very necessary. Now, vaso-occlusive crisis occurs because of sequestration of RBCs in the blood vessels and occlusion, vaso-occlusion. We've seen the pathophysiology that leads to that. So when the patient has dehydration or any sort of infection or any sort of blood loss or any other stress condition, that can cause this type of vaso-occlusive crisis. So the obvious treatment for that is to prevent all these things from happening. The first line of management is intravenous fluids. About 3 to 4 liters in intravenous injections, intravenous flow can be given to prevent dehydration and to increase hydration. The patient is supposed to take oral fluids also, but oral fluids can only be taken up to a certain extent. So a large bore catheter, IV catheter is placed and IV fluids are given up to maybe even up to 6 liters per day. So intravenous fluids should be given. You have to look for any signs of fluid overload in a patient who is older and also in patients who have compromised heart conditions. The next one is pain medication, oral or IV. Usually we go for analgesics which are central acting here. So we go for tramadol or any sort of pethidine or fentanyl, something that can relieve pain centrally. So either orally or IV. But once there is an intravenous line established, you can go for IV medications to relieve pain in these patients. So transfusion is used sparingly because it's not necessary in all types of vaso-occlusive crisis. But we'll discuss in the next few slides and what sort of complications we require transfusions. Next one is oxygen supplementation because you don't need the patient to go into hypoxemia. And then iron chelation. There is any excess iron that is causing this vaso-occlusive crisis, you can go for iron chelation also. So the third one is indications of blood transfusion. Uh, Indications in sickle cell anemia are splenic sequestration, where the accumulation of blood almost happens in the entire spleen, and the patient is going to have hypotension, severe abdominal pain, sometimes even splenic rupture also. Is very common in young children. Splenic sequestration is an important indication for blood transfusion. Cerebrovascular accident, CVA. But in case of ischemic cerebrovascular accident or hemorrhagic, as a matter of fact, the indication here is a little ambiguous. It's controversial because the uh, hyperviscosity of blood already present in the uh, patient has led to this particular type of stroke. So the presence of CVA does not actually require blood transfusion. So aplastic crisis also is an important indication for blood transfusion. Any acute ocular event which may lead to bleeding in the eye. Acute chest syndrome definitely requires blood transfusion. High output cardiac failure, not low output, high output cardiac failure requires blood transfusion. But you have to give a loop diuretic obviously along with the transfusion to prevent cardiac overload. Children with abnormal transcranial Dopplers, you have to look for if there's any abnormality in the brain, they require blood transfusion. Pulmonary hypertension, you require blood transfusion. Non-healing foot ulcers requires blood transfusion. And priapism, they all require blood transfusion. So these are the indications for blood transfusion. Go through that again. You might need to remember this indications of blood transfusion in sickle cell anemia. So what are the complications of transfusions? Other than just the normal ones, these are delayed transfusion reactions, alloimmunization, and hyperviscosity. Recurrent transfusions can lead to life-threatening hemolysis and shock. What is transfusion-induced hemolysis? In case of sickle cell anemia especially, there's life-threatening complications secondary to allo antibodies and autoantibodies. Hemolysis will occur, TRALI or acute lung injury, and ARDS can occur. Hypoxemia and hypovolemic shock can also occur. So the next one is treatment of complications. Now we know the complications of vaso-occlusive crisis are acute chest syndrome, acute splenic sequestration, aplastic crisis, infectious complications, strokes or clots, cardiovascular events, gallstones or liver disease, and pregnancy. Now, pregnancy is not a complication, but what if pregnancy is complicated by sickle cell anemia? We'll discuss that in the next few slides. Acute chest syndrome has acute lung injury secondary to fat emboli, bacterial infection, and viral disease. So that can cause acute chest syndrome. And we discussed about the pathophysiology of acute chest syndrome in the previous class. It can present with hypoxemia, chest pain, or fever. Tachypnea is present and infiltrates on chest X-ray may be seen. There may be a drop in hemoglobin. That is the need for blood transfusion. Acute chest syndrome is the most common cause of excuse me, morbidity and mortality. It is also the most common cause of death in sickle cell anemia. The highest incidence is seen in 2 to 4 years of age and lowest in adults. So children are usually affected with this acute chest syndrome. The management is hydroxyurea. It lowers the incidence of acute chest syndrome. ACS is not acute coronary syndrome here. It's acute chest syndrome. The O2 inhaled nitrous oxide or nitric oxide, the necessity for a steroid, exchange transfusion or transfusion of 3 to 4 units of PRBC in anemic patients. So this is the management of acute chest syndrome. Acute splenic sequestration is seen in 6 out of 100 patients, so it's very common. Leading cause of death in children. This is the leading cause of death in children with sickle cell anemia. It leads to hypovolemic shock. There's a left-sided upper quadrant pain, a drop in hemoglobin of 2 grams per deciliter. Excuse me. Mild to moderate thrombocytopenia. Erythrocytosis and spleen is usually palpable. So, in a patient with sickle cell disease, in the initial years of life, the spleen is palpable because of hypersplenism or splenic sequestration disease. Whereas in the older patients or adults in patients, the spleen is destroyed due to autosplenectomy. The management is to restore the intravascular volume using transfusion of PRBC. There's no role for emergency splenectomy because there's going to be heavy or massive bleeding. Consider transfusion maintenance after the patient is slowly recovering. If it recovers, however, you have to consider partial splenectomy. And prophylactic penicillin and pneumococcal vaccine should be given. Aplastic crisis is most common in sickle cell disease. The infection that leads to this is parvo B19 virus, which causes aplastic crisis. There's increased fatigue, fever, pallor, and thrombocytopenia. Arthralgia, headache, and rash can be seen. There's no compensatory reticulocytosis. So in the blood, let's be here, reticulocytes are not increased. Most recovers spontaneously. So parvo B19 virus infection subsides, the aplastic crisis also will subside. However, 87% will require blood transfusion, and in severe cases, they may require stem cell transplantation also. Infectious complications like sepsis, meningitis, encapsulated organisms can cause meningitis like meningococcus or pneumococcus, Haemophilus influenzae. Aplastic crisis can be seen with parvo B19 virus. Chronic leg ulcers can be seen and pneumonia. These are the infectious complications, and the function of the spleen varies. As the child ages, they lose the spleen function in sickle cell anemia. So you require prophylactic penicillin therapy and can reduce 80% of Streptococcus pneumoniae infections. Well, jolly bodies can also be seen. There is a 400-fold increase in the incidence of sepsis in children greater than 5 years. And the cause is fulminant and often fatal. 400-fold increase in the incidence of sepsis in children less than 5 years. The cause is fulminant and often fatal. And when you require antibiotics, you don't have to give antibiotics in every single child or patient with sickle cell anemia. You suspect an infection, there is no source, you have to give an antibiotic because it's empirical therapy. If there's meningitis or if you suspect meningitis, you have to give antibiotic because meningitis has high morbidity and mortality. Osteomyelitis or septic arthritis of salmonella can also be seen. Yeah, you have to give antibiotic there. UTI requires an antibiotic for sure. Toxic appearing child or patient requires an antibiotic. If the temperature is greater than 39, greater than 40, it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, WBC greater than 30K or less than 5K, you need to give an antibiotic. So the next complication is strokes or clots. CVA, cerebrovascular accident, can be seen. The risk of stroke by age 20 is 11%, by age 30 years is 15%, by age 45 years is 25%. So the risk of stroke increases as the age progresses, just like a normal patient, but is more in case of sickle cell anemia. Hemorrhagic was ischemic. Ischemic is more common in younger patients. Hemorrhagic is more common in older patients. 25% mortality after hemorrhagic stroke may occur after spleen sequestration, priapism, aplasia, viral illness, or TIA. Pulmonary embolia at DVT can also be seen. So these are clots. The management is role of blood transfusion is controversial. We discussed this previously just now. Antiplatelets and anticoagulants for ischemic stroke can be given. Hypertension management for hemorrhagic stroke can be seen. So hypertension management in hemorrhagic stroke is important in case of sickle cell disease because you need to choose the drug very carefully. Normally, in case of hypertension emergency, we go for sodium nitroprusside. In case of stroke, you can go for sodium nitroprusside, or you can go for injection Lebetlol, which is a beta blocker, non-selective beta blocker acting on both alpha and beta receptors. You can also go for nifedipine or nicardipine, but the preferred drug of choice is still Lebetlol. Cardiovascular events like cardiomegaly, murmur, S3 because of heart failure, suprasternal trill can also be heard. Atherosclerosis is rare. There's increased size in the aortic root and left atrium. Significant wall thickening in the septum secondary to anemia. And arrhythmia is common during acute pain crisis because of tachycardia and excess pumping of the heart. The patient can have palpitations, either because of sinus tachycardia or because of any tachyarrhythmia. Now, these tachyarrhythmias can develop because of thickening in the left atrium also, or increased size of the left atrium. So, atrial fibrillation can be seen, atrial flutter can be seen, or PSVT can also be seen. Management is symptomatic, or if you have arrhythmias, you give antiarrhythmics. In gallbladder or liver disease, the bilirubin stones are common, 12% in 2 to 4 years old and 42% in 15 to 80 years old. So, increases as the age progresses. This leads to gallstones or cholecystitis. Intrahepatic sickling can also be life-threatening. Causes right upper quadrant pain, fever, jaundice, and elevated LFT. How do you treat this? By cholecystectomy. So, an elective lap cholecystectomy is a better approach than an emergent cholecystectomy, which may be life-threatening. Now, iatrogenic complications are recurrent clots, hemolytic complications, iron overload because of repeated transfusions, constipation, port infections, and heart failure and kidney failure are iatrogenic complications. So, what about pregnancy? Can a female with sickle cell disease get pregnant? Yes, she can get pregnant, but there are obviously higher risk of complications. Spontaneous abortions occur in 5%. There's higher rate of preeclampsia. Preterm labor and premature labor can also be seen. For routine pregnancy, prophylactic transfusions are not recommended, and high risk management is to be done. So, what are the risk factors here? The risk of pregnancy, uh, 6.5% increase in anemia, rate of amniotic is increased, increased cesarean section rate, increased sickle chest syndrome, increased pulmonary complications, 13% increase premature birth, 25% increase intrauterine growth restriction, splenic sequestration is increased, increased infertility, 5% increase in hypertension, increased painful crisis, decreased placenta weight, increased placenta previa rate, increased maternal mortality, obviously because of all this, increased bone crisis, increased perinatal mortality, increased rate of meningitis, increased papillary necrosis can be seen, thrombophlebitis can be seen, increased pelvic inflammation, increased stillbirth rate, 25% increased miscarriage, 61% increased chance of infection, cerebral complications are increased, folate deficiency will be seen, and increased risk of stroke will be seen. So that is why in patients with a sickle cell disease who are planning to get pregnant, you need to start folate prophylaxis much prior to normal pregnancy. So if normal pregnancy, you start from 3 to 6 months before pregnancy. These patients you have to start before 1 year, and the dose was also increased 5 times, 3 times a day, 5 mg 3 times a day. So next one is vaccines and penicillin prophylaxis. All newborns with homozygous sickle cell disease (SS), sickle cell hemoglobin C disease, sickle cell beta thalassemia disease, they require vaccines and penicillin prophylaxis. You can start early at 2 to 3 months old, and penicillin 125 milligrams per oral 2 times a day is given. Does not need to continue after age 5. And other pathogens like E. coli, H. influenza, and Salmonella can cause sepsis. Now, people with sickle cell disease must reduce the risk of infections. This includes receiving certain vaccinations like Haemophilus influenzae vaccine, pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, pneumococcal polysaccharide vaccine (PPV). Now, the Universal Immunization Program contains pentavalent vaccine, DPT, Haemophilus influenzae, and also hepatitis. In addition to that, you have to add pneumococcal conjugate vaccine and pneumococcal polysaccharide vaccine in these particular children. So, this is the vaccine and penicillin prophylaxis for these sickle cell disease children. The sixth one is disease modifying therapy. Hydroxyurea is a drug that has been used since the last few years for treatment of sickle cell anemia. It's mostly used because it decreases the rate of acute chest syndrome, sickle cell crisis causing pain, and transfusion. So, in a patient of sickle cell disease who requires more than 6 hospitalizations per year due to pain crisis, we need to start the patient on hydroxyurea. Now, hydroxyurea is a drug that can cause bone marrow suppression. It can also cause leukocytosis. So, in these patients, because of these particular complications, you should give hydroxyurea in only those who absolutely require it. So, the absolute indication is only in those who have acute chest syndrome, pain crises, and greater than 6 hospitalizations per year of sickle cell anemia crisis. Increases the fetal hemoglobin. Hydroxyurea increases the fetal hemoglobin. Fetal hemoglobin is more productive. It does not cause early hemolysis. It does not cause sequestration. So it also reduces the mortality. There is a cure for sickle cell disease in the form of stem cell transplantation, and also children with strokes are indicated. There should be a HLA match sibling, but it's very rare to find a perfect match for stem cell transplant in sickle cell anemia. So that is why it's not done that often. More thalassemia is done often, but sickle cell anemia is not that often done. The last one is gene therapy. The aim is to transform a patient's blood cells into pluripotent stem cells and replace the defective portion of the gene. These cells will be then coaxed into becoming hemopoietic cells, which can specifically regenerate the entire range of red blood cells. So that's the proposition that is being given, but it's a long way to go. We have enhanced gene therapy in the recent years, but still a long way to go. There's no cases that have been proven to have gene therapy as a cure for sickle cell disease. So that is the end of today's class, and that's the treatment for sickle cell anemia. In the next class, we'll discuss about thalassemia or hereditary spherocytosis. There'll be some MCQs, there'll be some questions also next class. So go back and read about sickle cell anemia. Don't go back, sit there in your homes and read about sickle cell anemia. And if there's any doubts, you can reach me now on the next class. Thank you. And so, any doubts?